human brain is as powerful as it is creative, as intricate as it is small. Weighing about as much as an average pineapple, whatever it loses in size, it makes up for in power. Our brains generate enough electricity to power a light bulb, and they process information as fast as a NASCAR. But not many people know of the brain's complexity. Hopefully this video will provide a good definition to what's in the brain and how it functions. For this presentation, I've decided to make a time-lapse video of me drawing the brain and what it's made up of. I will be narrating and telling you all about the key parts of the brain and how they function. So, what is the brain made up of and how does it all work? I've decided to make two brains instead of just one, an internal and an external view of the brain, just so we can get a better understanding of what goes on upstairs. The first part of the brain that we will discuss is called the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is located in the front of our brains, and the frontal lobe is associated with reasoning, planning, parts of speech, movement, emotions, and problem solving. Next in my presentation, I've decided to go over Wernicke's area and Broca's area. Both of these areas are very, very important to our society because they process language and they also help us comprehend speech. Without these two areas, we wouldn't be able to comprehend our own language, thus we wouldn't be able to communicate with others, making it very hard to have conversations with people. Therefore, if we couldn't have conversations with people, life would be very difficult. Next in my presentation, I've decided to focus on the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is the main processor of our sight, and it interprets the images that our eyes see. Believe it or not, the occipital lobe actually interprets the vision, not our eyes. Our eyes are just a lens as on the camera. Next in line is the medulla oblongata and the brainstem. This structure in our brain is very responsible for our basic vital functions such as breathing, our heartbeat, and regulating our blood pressure. Without our brainstem and the medulla oblongata, we wouldn't have basic life. We wouldn't be able to function as human beings. We also wouldn't be able to breathe and live our normal lives. This is one of the most important parts of the brain because it just functions for us and we don't have to learn anything. Now we have the motor cortex. The motor cortex is responsible for conscious thought and controls of the voluntary movement of our body parts. This is how we learn how to ride bikes, we learn how to walk. Our motor cortex controls all of our movements. Also, the parietal lobe coordinates movement as well. It helps with orientation, recognition, and perception of stimuli. Now we have the sensory cortex. The sensory cortex receives and processes sensory signals from our body. This is very important to us because it helps us coordinate our movement, telling us what we need to move at a certain time. It goes hand in hand with the motor cortex. Now we have the cerebellum. The cerebellum is the part of the brain responsible for regulating and coordinating movement, posture, and balance. This also has the nickname of being the mini brain of the big brain. Now we have the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe works to understand memories, speech, and auditory stimuli. It also is associated with perception. Located right under the frontal lobe and not too far from the hippocampus, you can say that this part of the brain is in the right spot for memorizing things. Last but not least in our external view of the brain, we have the pons. The pons is involved in motor control and sensory analysis. It also has important parts linked to the consciousness levels in our sleep. Without the pons, we wouldn't be able to sleep correctly, therefore we wouldn't be able to function correctly. Unfortunately, while I was filming this part of the video, I neglected to realize that I was drawing with permanent marker on a very thin sheet of paper. After I realized how thick this marker was, I lifted up the sheet of paper not only to find out that it was bleeding through, but to also figure out that I have ruined my dining room table. Now that I've gone over what the external view of the brain looks like, let's take a look at what the internal view of the brain looks like. After rethinking my strategy and actually using my brain to think about the dining room table itself, I decided to put down some foam boards to protect the table from any further damage. After I finished my first brain, I began to really dive into this project, and I really was feeling the knowledge flowing from all my studies, and I really was getting into this research project, and it was really becoming an interesting topic for me. Now let's talk about the internal part of the brain. Let's start off by talking about the thalamus. Almost every sensory signal enters the thalamus and then gets sent out to the rest of the body. The thalamus is responsible for sending and receiving signals. Now we have the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum connects the two hemispheres of the brains together. It allows for one side of the brain to send messages to the other. This allows for there to be unison amongst the hemispheres in the brain. Without the corpus callosum, our brains wouldn't be able to function properly. The corpus callosum is made up of thousands, millions of fibers. This allows it to be considered the bridge connecting the two hemispheres of the brain. Next, we have the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the part of the brain that works with homeostasis, emotion, thirst, hunger, circadian rhythms, and it controls the autonomic nervous system. It also controls the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is kind of connected to the brainstem. They have similarities where they control basic vital needs like hunger, thirst, and then the brainstem controls your voluntary actions like breathing and heart rate. Next, we have the amygdala. The amygdala is located in the temporal lobe, and it's involved in memory, emotion, and fear. The amygdala was the smallest of the glands that I researched, but yet it is one of the most powerful involving fear. The hippocampus is associated with learning and memory. It is responsible for converting short-term memory into permanent memory. To me, this is one of the most important parts of the brain, because without memory, we wouldn't have a way of life. To help me remember this, I have always thought of a hippo running through a campus. One of the most important parts of our human brain is called the pituitary gland. This gland is called the master gland. It controls all of our hormones and regulates the stimulus of all the glands. Last but not least, I decided to throw in the optic nerve for fun. The optic nerve provides a sensory tract from the retina of our eyeballs to the brain. There's a crossover that allows both eyes to work independently, thus giving us our vision. All of this vision is perceived and recorded in the back of our brains in the occipital lobe. 6 hours, 10 markers, and one ruined dining room table later, we have our finished product of the internal view and external view of the brain.